A 13-year-old boy sat alone in the last row of the courtroom, clutching a worn folder. When the judge called his father's case, he stood up with trembling legs. What happened next left the entire room in tears. Michael's hands shook as he cracked the eggs into the sizzling pan. The kitchen clock read 6:15 a.m., and the early morning light barely filtered through the cramped Brooklyn apartment's windows. His father, Jerome, would be up in 15 minutes, just like every other morning for the past 5 years since Mom died. "Don't burn them this time," he muttered to himself, watching the edges of the eggs turn crispy white. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Keep the heat medium-low, baby. Patience makes perfect eggs." The toast popped up, making him jump. Michael grabbed it quickly, wincing at the heat as he buttered the slightly burnt pieces. The apartment smelled of coffee and breakfast, just like she used to make it. "Something smells good in here," Jerome's deep voice carried from the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his blue bus driver's uniform, his name tag polished and straight. "Just eggs and toast," Michael said, sliding the plate across their small kitchen table. "And coffee's almost ready." Jerome sat down, his large frame making the old chair creak. "You didn't have to cook again, son. You should be sleeping." "I like cooking," Michael shrugged, pouring coffee into his father's chipped world's best dad mug. "Besides, someone has to make sure you eat before driving all those kids around." Speaking of which, Jerome started, but his phone buzzed loudly on the table. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Michael watched his father's face change as he answered. The usual morning warmth drained away, replaced by something he'd never seen before: fear. "This is Jerome Wilson," his father said, standing up so quickly the chair scraped against the linoleum floor. "There must be some mistake. I was working." A loud knock at the door cut him off. 3 sharp raps that made both of them freeze. "NYPD. Open up." Jerome's coffee mug clattered against the table, dark liquid spilling across the surface. "Michael, go to your room. Now." "But Dad." "Now, son." The knocking came again, harder. "NYPD. We have a warrant." Michael didn't move. His feet felt cemented to the floor as Jerome walked to the door, phone still in hand. The moment his father turned the handle, everything exploded into motion. 2 officers burst in, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them, please," Jerome said, raising his hands slowly. "My son." "Against the wall." One officer grabbed Jerome's arm, spinning him around roughly. The phone clattered to the floor as handcuffs clicked into place. Michael's voice came out as a whisper. "Dad, it's okay, son. Everything's going to be okay." Jerome's voice was steady, but Michael saw his hands trembling as the officers patted him down. More police poured into the apartment. They moved through rooms like a storm, pulling drawers open, dumping contents, flipping furniture. Michael pressed himself against the kitchen wall, watching helplessly as one officer threw his mother's photo albums to the floor. "Stop it," he screamed, finding his voice. "You're breaking everything." "Stay back, kid," an officer warned, holding up his hand. "You can't take him. He didn't do anything." Michael lunged forward, but Jerome's sharp voice stopped him. "Michael, stay there. Don't move." His father's eyes locked with his, pleading. "I need you to be strong right now. Can you do that for me?" Tears burned in Michael's eyes as he nodded. "Jerome Wilson, you're under arrest for armed robbery," one officer read from a paper. "You have the right to remain silent." The words blurred together as Michael watched them lead his father away. Jerome tried to look back, but an officer pushed his head down as they moved through the door. "Dad!" Michael called out, his voice breaking. "Dad!" But the door slammed shut, leaving him alone in the wreckage of their apartment. The eggs burned in the pan, forgotten. Coffee dripped slowly off the edge of the table, forming a dark puddle on the floor. In the sudden silence, the kitchen clock kept ticking. 6:43 a.m. Their last breakfast together grew cold on the table, untouched. Michael stood frozen, staring at the open door. His father's world's best dad mug lay shattered on the floor, coffee seeping into the cracks of the linoleum. Outside, he heard the police car doors slam, an engine start. His legs gave out, and he slid down the kitchen wall to sit among the scattered papers and broken dishes. The morning sun filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the chaos of their destroyed home. A sob caught in his throat as reality crashed over him. His father was gone. He was alone, and he had no idea what to do next. The sound of the police sirens faded into the distance, carrying his father away. Michael hugged his knees to his chest, rocking slightly as tears fell onto his pajama pants. The apartment felt huge and empty around him, filled with the lingering scent of burnt eggs and spilled coffee. Above the stove, the clock continued its relentless ticking. 6:47 a.m. Just 32 minutes since he'd started making breakfast, thinking it would be a normal day. Now nothing would ever be normal again. The mess seemed endless. Michael picked up another broken picture frame, carefully pulling out a photo of his mother from the shattered glass. Her smile looked back at him, frozen in time at his 10th birthday party. He added it to the growing stack on the kitchen counter, trying not to look at the dried coffee stains still marking the floor. A knock at the door made him jump. His heart raced until he heard a familiar voice. "Michael? It's Mrs. Thompson from next door. Are you in there, honey?" He hesitated, staring at the door. Mrs. Thompson had lived next to them for 3 years, always bringing over extra food and checking on him when his dad worked late. Still, his father's last words echoed in his mind. "Be strong." The knock came again, softer this time. "I heard what happened this morning. I brought you some lunch." Michael's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the eggs. He walked to the door, sliding the chain lock off. Mrs. Thompson stood there holding a covered plate, her gray hair neat as always, but her eyes worried. She took in his appearance, still in his pajamas, face streaked with dried tears. "Oh, child," she said softly. "I'm okay," Michael said automatically, but his voice cracked. She stepped inside, surveying the destruction. "Let's get this cleaned up. Then you'll eat something." "But," "No buts. Your father would want you taken care of." She set the plate down and grabbed a broom from the corner. "Start with the glass. Carefully now." They worked in silence for an hour. Mrs. Thompson swept while Michael sorted through papers and photos, trying to reorganize their lives. His hands shook when he found his father's bus route schedules scattered across the floor. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked finally, the words bursting out. "I don't even know where they took him." Mrs. Thompson paused her sweeping. "First precinct would be my guess. It's closest." She leaned the broom against the wall. "Get dressed. I'll take you there." The police station looked nothing like the ones on TV. It was smaller, dingier, with flickering fluorescent lights and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Michael's shoes squeaked on the linoleum as he approached the front desk. The officer didn't look up from his computer. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for my father. Jerome Wilson. They took him this morning." Now the officer looked up, eyes narrowing. "How old are you, kid?" 13. "Please, I just want to see him. Minors can't visit without a guardian present." The officer glanced at Mrs. Thompson. "Are you his legal guardian?" "No, I'm a neighbor." "Then I can't help you." He turned back to his computer. "Come back with a parent or legal guardian." Michael's hands clenched into fists. "My only parent is in there. How am I supposed to?" "Michael," Mrs. Thompson touched his shoulder. "Let's go." Outside, he kicked the building's brick wall, pain shooting through his foot. "This isn't fair." "Life rarely is," Mrs. Thompson said quietly. "But getting angry won't help your father." They rode the bus home in silence. Michael pressed his forehead against the window, watching his neighborhood scroll past. A newsstand headline caught his eye. "Armed robbery suspect apprehended." His father's name jumped out from the text below. "Stop the bus," he shouted, startling the driver. He ran back to the newsstand, grabbing a paper with trembling hands. The article was short but devastating. "Armed robbery at a convenience store. Suspect described as male, African American, wearing a hooded sweatshirt. Security camera footage inconclusive. Suspect apprehended based on matching description." "That's it?" Michael's voice shook. "They took him because he's black and wears hoodies?" Mrs. Thompson gently took the paper. "Come on, we need to figure out your next steps." Back at the apartment, Michael sat at the clean kitchen table, picking at the sandwich Mrs. Thompson had made. His mother's photo albums were stacked neatly again, but some of the spines were still bent from being thrown. "You can't stay here alone," Mrs. Thompson said finally. I have to. Dad will need somewhere to come home to. Michael, I can take care of myself. I've been cooking since Mom died. She sighed. At least let me check on you. And you'll come to me if you need anything? He nodded, not meeting her eyes. After she left, Michael pulled out his father's work schedule. The bus company had to have cameras. They'd show his dad was working, not robbing stores. He started writing down times and dates, his pencil pressing so hard it nearly tore the paper. A knock at the door made him freeze. Different from Mrs. Thompson's, official, demanding. Hello? This is Sandra Chun from Child Protective Services. Michael's heart stopped. He didn't breathe, didn't move. We received a report about a minor possibly living alone. We need to check on your welfare. He stayed silent, watching the doorknob. If no one answers, we'll have to return with the police. Michael closed his eyes, counting his heartbeats until the footsteps retreated. He couldn't let them take him. His dad would never find him if they put him in foster care. That night, he lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment creaked and settled, sounds he'd never noticed when his father was home. Every siren made him tense, wondering if they were coming back for him too. He pulled out his phone, opening his school email. The message he'd started and deleted 10 times still sat blank. Dear Mr. Martinez, I won't be in class because... Because what? Because his father was arrested? Because he was hiding from CPS? Because everything had fallen apart in 32 minutes on a normal Tuesday morning? He deleted the draft again, rolling over to face the wall. His father's voice echoed in his head. Be strong. I'm trying, Dad. He whispered into the darkness. I'm trying. The courthouse loomed over Michael like a mountain of gray stone and judgment. His tie, his father's tie, really felt too tight around his neck. The worn folder of bus schedules and route maps weighed heavy in his backpack as he climbed the steps alone. Inside, the security guard frowned at him. Where are your parents, kid? My father's hearing is today. Michael's voice came out smaller than he wanted. Jerome Wilson. The guard checked his list, eyebrows rising. You're here alone? Michael nodded, arms wrapped around his backpack as he went through the metal detector. The guard watched him all the way to the elevator. The courtroom hallway buzzed with voices, lawyers in suits rushing past, officers leading handcuffed people in orange jumpsuits, families huddled on hard wooden benches. Michael found a spot in the corner, checking his phone. 8:47 a.m. The hearing was at 9 o'clock. Jerome Wilson? A man in a rumpled suit approached, flipping through papers. I'm David Cooper, your father's public defender. Michael stood quickly. I have evidence. The bus company has cameras. Slow down. Cooper barely glanced at him. Where's your guardian? I'm 13. I can. You can't be here alone. Cooper ran a hand through his thinning hair. Look, this is just a preliminary hearing. The judge will review charges and set bail. Your father needs a responsible adult present. But I have proof he was working. Michael tried to pull the folder from his backpack. Cooper checked his watch. I have 2 minutes. Your father's best bet is to cooperate. Make this easy on everyone. Easy. Michael's voice cracked. He didn't do anything. Keep your voice down. Cooper straightened his tie. Stay quiet in there. Let me handle this. The courtroom doors opened. Michael slipped inside, finding a seat in the back row. His hands shook as he gripped the folder. He'd memorized every schedule, every route. His father couldn't have robbed that store. He was driving his bus. He had proof. All rise. Michael stood with everyone else as the judge entered, an older white man with steel gray hair and reading glasses. Case number 2025 CR 1437, People versus Jerome Wilson. The side door opened. 2 officers led his father in, hands and feet shackled. Michael's chest tightened. Jerome's uniform was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. Dark circles marked his eyes. Dad, Michael whispered, but Jerome didn't turn around. The prosecutor stood, a sharp-suited woman with red lipstick. Your Honor, Mr. Wilson is charged with armed robbery of Sam's convenience store on February 4th at approximately 2:15 p.m. Security footage shows a black male in a hooded sweatshirt threatening the clerk with what appeared to be a firearm. Objection! Michael shouted, standing up. He was driving his bus. Order. The judge banged his gavel. Young man, sit down or you'll be removed. Cooper grabbed Michael's arm, pulling him back into his seat. Be quiet, he hissed. The prosecutor continued. The defendant matches the description provided by witnesses. Given the violent nature of the crime and his previous arrest, a marijuana possession charge from 15 years ago, Cooper interrupted. Mr. Wilson has maintained steady employment as a school bus driver for the past decade. He's not a flight risk. He was identified by multiple witnesses, the prosecutor pressed. From a vague description that could match thousands of people, Michael couldn't help himself. Check the bus cameras. Final warning, the judge said sharply. Mr. Cooper, control your client's son, or he'll be escorted out. Jerome finally turned, meeting Michael's eyes. The pain and fear there made Michael's throat close up. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, given the serious nature of these charges, the state requests remand without bail pending trial. No. Michael stood again. Please, just look at the evidence. He was working. I have proof. Officers, the judge nodded. 2 court officers moved toward Michael. Jerome half rose, chains rattling. Michael, go, his father called. It's okay, son. Go. But Dad, the officers reached him. One took his arm while the other grabbed his backpack. The folder fell, papers scattering across the floor. Wait. Michael struggled. The bus schedules. Just look at them. Remove him, the judge ordered. Michael fought against the officer's grip as they dragged him toward the door. Dad! Dad! The last thing he saw was his father's face, tears streaming down his cheeks as Cooper whispered something to him. Then the doors closed, cutting him off from everything. The officers released him in the hallway. Stay out here, kid. Don't make this worse for your father. Michael slumped onto a bench, head in his hands. Through the heavy doors, he could barely hear the proceedings continuing. His evidence lay scattered and ignored on the courtroom floor. 10 minutes later, the doors opened. People filed out, including the prosecutor, who didn't even glance his way. Cooper emerged last, straightening his tie. What happened? Michael grabbed his sleeve. Cooper sighed. Remanded without bail. Trial date set for next month. What does that mean? He stays in jail until trial. Cooper checked his phone. Look, kid, you need to find a guardian. Your father's facing serious charges. This isn't a game, but he's innocent. That's for a jury to decide. Cooper handed him a card. My office number. Don't come to court alone again. Michael watched him walk away, the card crumpling in his fist. Through the courtroom windows, he saw officers leading his father out a different door. I'll fix this, he whispered, even though Jerome couldn't hear him. I promise. The ride home felt endless. Michael pressed his face against the bus window, the city blurring through his tears. His backpack sat empty beside him, his carefully gathered evidence left behind on the courtroom floor. But he'd start over. He'd find more proof. He'd make them listen. He had to. His father's life depended on it. The bus terminal smelled of diesel and old coffee. Michael huddled deeper into his father's spare uniform jacket, the sleeves rolled up multiple times. A clipboard holding blank paper rested on his knees as he watched drivers clock in for the morning shift. Jerome's kid, a tall driver with gray-streaked dreadlocks, stopped in front of him. What you doing here so early? Mr. Jackson. Michael straightened. I need your help. Dad's in trouble. Marcus Jackson looked around before sitting next to him. Heard about that. Cops got it wrong, but ain't nobody asking us, right? Were you working last Tuesday? When it happened? Sure was. Saw Jerome heading out on his route same as always. Jackson's face darkened. Tried telling the police that. They didn't want to hear it. Michael clicked his pen. Can you write it down? What time you saw him? Jackson took the clipboard slowly. You building a case? Someone has to. Michael's voice cracked. His lawyer won't listen. The judge won't listen. But Dad couldn't have robbed that store. He was here, driving his route. Jackson wrote for several minutes, detailing times and locations. You know they got cameras on every bus, right? For student safety. Michael's heart jumped. Really? With timestamps? Sure. Downloads to the main office every night. Jackson handed back the clipboard. But good luck getting that footage. Company lawyers got it locked down tight. Other drivers began arriving. Some avoided Michael's eyes, hurrying past. But a few stopped, adding their statements to his growing collection. Jerome's a good man, always on time, never missed a shift. Kids love him. Parents trust him. By 9 a.m., Michael had 6 written statements. His hand cramped from taking notes, but hope flickered in his chest for the first time since the arrest. A sharp voice cut through the terminal. Who authorized a minor on premises? The terminal supervisor, Mr. Peterson, strode toward them. Drivers scattered, leaving Michael alone on the bench. Sir, please, Michael stood. About my father's bus camera footage. Out. Peterson pointed to the door. This is a restricted area. Security. Just 5 minutes. The footage will prove he's innocent. A security guard appeared, reaching for Michael's arm. He ducked away, clutching his clipboard. Your father is accused of armed robbery. Peterson snapped. We can't risk our reputation by getting involved. The footage has been subpoenaed by the police. Then why haven't they shown it? Michael demanded. Because it proves they're wrong. Remove him, Peterson ordered. The guard grabbed Michael's shoulders, pushing him toward the exit. His father's jacket slipped off one shoulder as he struggled. Please, he called back. Just check the footage. February 4th, 2:15 p.m. He was driving his route. The terminal door slammed behind him. Michael stumbled on the sidewalk, tears blurring his vision. A few drivers watched through the windows, their faces worried but helpless. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Thompson. CPS came by again, asking questions. Be careful. Michael's hands shook as he shoved the phone away. He had to move faster. Had to find more proof before they took him away, too. The convenience store stood on a corner 3 blocks from their apartment. Michael had walked past it 100 times with his dad. Now yellow police tape still marked the door, and a closed for renovation sign hung in the window. He pressed his face against the glass. The security camera hung in the corner, its red light blinking. Somewhere in that footage was proof that the robber wasn't his father. But how could he get to it? Hey, kid. A voice made him jump. An older Asian man stood nearby, keys in hand. Stores closed. Are you the owner? Mr. Chin? The man's face tightened. Sam Chin, yes. But we're not discussing the incident. Please, sir, the man they arrested. He's my father. But he's innocent. He was driving his school bus when it happened. Police say they have witnesses. Chin unlocked the door. Now please leave before I call them again. Did you see him? The robber? Michael stepped forward. Did he look like my dad? Chin paused in the doorway. I wasn't here. My daughter was working. She's still too scared to come back. Can I talk to her? Please? Dad's been driving kids to school for 10 years. He'd never hurt anyone. Enough. Chin's voice hardened. My daughter is traumatized. I won't let you upset her more. The door closed firmly. Michael heard the lock click. Back on the street, he reviewed his notes. 6 witness statements from the bus terminal, all saying the same thing. Jerome Wilson was driving his route just like every other day. But would anyone listen? His phone buzzed again. Mrs. Thompson, moving company called. Have to be out by end of month. I'm so sorry. Michael's legs went weak. He sat heavily on the curb, the clipboard trembling in his hands. Mrs. Thompson was the only one helping him. Without her, a police car rolled past slowly. Michael ducked his head, pretending to read his papers until it turned the corner. They were watching, always watching, but he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. He pulled out his phone, opening the bus company website. There had to be a way to get that camera footage, maybe through their IT department, or a new email popped up from his school. Urgent. Meeting requested regarding attendance concerns. Guardian presence required. Michael closed the email, his chest tight. Time was running out. They'd take him away, put him in foster care. Then who would help his father? He stood up, straightening his father's jacket. The bus terminal's afternoon shift would start soon. New drivers. New witnesses. I'm not giving up, he whispered, gripping the clipboard tighter. I'm not letting them win. The February wind cut through him as he walked back toward the terminal. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he kept moving. Had to keep moving. His father was counting on him, and Michael Wilson was not going to let him down. The Rikers Island visiting room buzzed with low conversations and occasional sobs. Michael sat at the scratched metal table, trying not to stare at the other families around him. He'd forged Mrs. Thompson's signature on the guardian consent form, his hand shaking as he copied from the permission slips she'd signed before. The door buzzed. His heart stopped. Jerome shuffled in, hands cuffed in front of him, the orange jumpsuit hanging looser than before. Dark circles marked his eyes, and his cheeks had hollowed. An officer led him to the table. "Dad!" Michael started to stand, but the guard's sharp look pushed him back down. "Michael!" Jerome's voice cracked. He sat heavily, the chains clinking. "You shouldn't be here alone. I had to come. Cooper called. He said—" Michael swallowed hard. "He said they offered you a deal." Jerome looked down at his hands. 5 years if I plead guilty. Instead of 20 if we go to trial. But you're innocent." Michael's voice rose. Other visitors turned to look. He leaned forward, whispering fiercely. "I have proof. The other drivers saw you. They wrote statements, son." Jerome's eyes were wet. "The prosecutor has 3 witnesses who identified me. Security footage that shows someone my height, my build, in a hoodie. That could be anyone." Michael pulled out his folder. "Look, I got the bus schedules. And Mr. Jackson wrote down exactly when he saw you." And, "Michael, stop." Jerome reached across the table, but the chains stopped him short. "You have to stop this." "What?" Mrs. Thompson called. "Said CPS is watching the apartment. They'll take you away if I don't care." Tears burned Michael's eyes. "You can't take the deal. You can't. 5 years." Jerome's voice shook. "You'll be 18 when I get out. Old enough to—" "To what?" "To visit you in prison for something you didn't do." Michael's fists clenched under the table. "Mom wouldn't want, don't." Jerome's face twisted with pain. "Don't use her like that. She'd fight. She wouldn't let them." Michael's voice broke completely. "We couldn't save her. But I can save you." "No, son." Jerome leaned forward, chains scraping the table. "You can't save me. Not this time. The bus cameras," Michael whispered desperately. "They have footage. If I could just— Enough." Jerome's palm slapped the table. The guard stepped closer. "You think I don't know what you're doing? Skipping school? Sneaking into the bus terminal? Getting Mrs. Thompson in trouble with CPS?" Michael recoiled like he'd been slapped. "I'm trying to help. You're 13 years old." Jerome's voice cracked again. "Your job is to go to school. To be safe. To have a life." "What life?" "Without you." The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the things they couldn't say. All the memories of another hospital room, another helpless wait, another loss they couldn't stop. "I can't lose you too," Michael finally whispered. Jerome's shoulders slumped. "And I can't watch you destroy yourself trying to save me. Dad, please." "The deal expires tomorrow." Jerome straightened, his face settling into hard lines. "I'm taking it." "No." "Yes." Jerome's voice was final. "You'll stay with Mrs. Thompson until they find a foster home. You'll go to school. You'll live your life." "I won't." Michael stood, the chair scraping back. "I won't let you do this." "Sit down, kid," the guard warned. "Michael." Jerome's voice softened. "Please. I'm trying to protect you. Like you protected Mom?" The words burst out before he could stop them. Jerome flinched like he'd been struck. Pain and grief flooded his face, and for a moment, Michael saw every one of the sleepless nights after her death, every extra shift worked to pay medical bills that mounted anyway, every quiet sob behind closed doors. "I'm sorry," Michael whispered. "I didn't mean—" "Time's up." The guard stepped forward. "Dad, promise me," Jerome said quickly as they pulled him up. "Promise you'll stop. Let me do this. Please, son." Michael watched them lead his father away, the chains rattling with each step. The door buzzed, then slammed. He stood alone in the visiting room, the folder of evidence crushed in his grip. Other families moved around him, hugging, crying, saying goodbye. His phone buzzed. Another email from school. Another warning from CPS. Another piece of his world crumbling away. Outside, the February wind cut through his jacket, his father's jacket. The bus back to Brooklyn wouldn't come for 20 minutes. Michael pulled out his phone, fingers numb as he typed. "Mr. Cooper, don't submit the plea deal. I can prove Dad's innocent. Give me one more day. Please." "Michael Wilson," the response came before he reached the bus stop. "Deal expires 5 p.m. tomorrow." Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Michael deleted the email, his vision blurring. One day, 24 hours to save his father from throwing away 5 years of his life. The bus arrived, brakes squealing. Michael climbed on, dropping into a seat near the back. Through the window, Rikers Island loomed gray and cold against the winter sky. "I'm not giving up," he whispered, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. "I don't care what you say. I'm not giving up." The bus pulled away, carrying him back to an empty apartment and a ticking clock. Tomorrow, his father would sacrifice everything to protect him, unless Michael could find a way to protect them both. Michael spread the evidence across his bedroom floor: bus schedules, driver statements, newspaper clippings, hastily scribbled notes. His phone showed 8:47 p.m. In less than 24 hours, his father would sign away 5 years of his life. The apartment creaked around him, empty and cold. He'd turn off the heat to save money, working by the light of his desk lamp to avoid running up the electric bill. His phone buzzed. "Mrs. Thompson, movers coming at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Door will be open if you need anything before I go." Michael's throat tightened. He typed back, "Thank you for everything." Another buzz. His school counselor. "Michael, your attendance hearing is scheduled for Friday. A guardian must be present." He deleted that one without responding. Friday wouldn't matter if he couldn't stop tomorrow from happening. A knock at the door made him freeze. Heavy official. His heart pounded as he crept to the peephole. 2 CPS workers stood in the hallway, files in hand. "Michael Wilson?" A woman's voice. "We need to talk about your living situation." He backed away silently, holding his breath. They knocked again. And again. "We can help you, Michael. Your father agreed to temporary foster placement while he serves his sentence." Serves his sentence. Like it was already decided. Like they'd already given up. "If you don't answer, we'll have to return with law enforcement." Michael pressed his hands over his ears, sliding down the wall until they finally left. His father's words echoed in his head. "Let me do this. Please, son." But he couldn't. He wouldn't. Back in his room, he pulled out his mother's old laptop. The battery only lasted 20 minutes now, but it was enough. He opened the bus company's website, scanning employee photos until he found what he needed: the IT department supervisor's email. His fingers shook as he typed. "Dear Mr. Roberts, my name is Michael Wilson. My father, Jerome Wilson, drove bus 247 on Route 15. He's accused of robbing a store on February 4th at 2:15 p.m., but he was driving his route. The bus cameras would prove it. Please. He's going to plead guilty tomorrow because he thinks it will protect me. But he's innocent. I have statements from other drivers. I have the schedules. I just need the camera footage. Help me save my father." Michael, he hit send before he could second-guess himself. The laptop battery died seconds later, screen going black. 9:34 p.m. No response. Michael pulled his father's spare uniform jacket tighter around his shoulders. The familiar smell of diesel and coffee still clung to it, fainter now after weeks of wear. He picked up each piece of evidence, organizing it carefully in the worn folder. The driver's statements, the route maps, the timing calculations showing it was physically impossible for his father to be in 2 places at once. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Michael, this is David Cooper. Your father asked me to check on you. The plea hearing is at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Please don't make a scene." Make a scene? Like fighting for the truth was just bad theater. The courthouse lobby clock read 7:58 a.m. Michael sat on a hard wooden bench, his folder clutched tight, watching early morning sunlight filter through tall windows. His tie felt too tight, his shoes pinched. But none of that mattered now. Security guards changed shifts, giving him suspicious looks. He'd been waiting since they opened the doors at 7:30, rehearsing his words over and over in his head. 8:42 a.m. Cooper rushed past, briefcase in hand. "Mr. Cooper." Michael jumped up. "Please, just look at what I found." "Not now, kid." Cooper didn't slow down. "Hearing's at 2. Go home. The police have the bus footage. They're hiding it." That made Cooper pause. He turned slowly. "What?" Michael thrust forward the IT supervisor's email. "See? They have proof Dad was driving his route." Cooper scanned the email, frowning. "This doesn't prove anything. And it's hearsay anyway. Inadmissible. But, Michael, Cooper's voice softened slightly. Your father's taking the deal. 5 years instead of 20. It's the best outcome we can hope for. It's wrong. Michael's voice echoed in the lobby. You're supposed to defend him. I'm defending him. Cooper handed back the phone. By keeping him from spending the next 2 decades in prison. He walked away, leaving Michael standing alone, the email glowing accusingly on his screen. 9:17 a.m. The lobby filled with lawyers, defendants, families. Michael's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch, but the thought of food made him feel sick. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Thompson, movers are here. Left you some food in your fridge. Be safe, child. Another buzz. CPS, final notice regarding placement hearing. Michael turned off his phone. Nothing mattered except the next few hours. He found the courtroom early, slipping into the back row. Different from the preliminary hearing room. Bigger, more formal. The judge's bench loomed like a mountain of dark wood and authority. 11:23 a.m. People trickled in. Michael recognized the prosecutor, sharp in her dark suit. She didn't glance his way. Cooper arrived at 1:45 p.m., speaking quietly with the court clerk. Still no sign of Jerome. 1:55 p.m., the side door opened. 2 officers led his father in, chains rattling with each step. Jerome looked smaller somehow, shoulders hunched under the orange jumpsuit. All rise. The judge entered, different from last time. An older black woman with steel-gray hair and reading glasses that caught the fluorescent light. Case number 2025, CR 1437, plea hearing for Jerome Wilson. Michael's hands shook as he gripped the folder. This was it, his last chance. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we've reached an agreement. Mr. Wilson will plead guilty to armed robbery. The state recommends 5 years with possibility of parole. Mr. Wilson, the judge peered down. You understand the terms of this agreement? Jerome's voice came out rough. Yes, Your Honor. And you're entering this plea voluntarily? Jerome swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. Michael's chair scraped back before he realized he was standing. No. All heads turned. Jerome's face went pale. Michael, sit down. Your Honor, please. Michael clutched his folder. My father's innocent. I can prove it. Young man, the judge warned, this is not. The police have video footage showing he was driving his bus. They're hiding it. Michael's voice cracked. I have statements from other drivers. I have the schedules. It was impossible for him to be at that store. Bailiff, the prosecutor started. Wait. The judge held up her hand. She studied Michael over her glasses. Approached the bench. Young man. Michael's legs shook as he walked forward. Jerome tried to reach for him, but the chains held him back. How old are you? The judge asked. 13, Your Honor. And you gathered evidence yourself? Michael nodded, opening his folder with trembling hands. The robbery was at 2:15 p.m. Dad's bus route shows he was 3 miles away, dropping kids at Washington Elementary. 5 drivers saw him. They wrote statements. He placed the papers on the bench. The judge picked them up, reading slowly. Your Honor, the prosecutor interrupted. This is highly irregular. Miss Carter? The judge's voice was sharp. I'm reading. Silence fell over the courtroom. Michael's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. Jerome stood frozen, tears tracking down his cheeks. The judge set down the last paper. Mr. Cooper, did you review this evidence? Cooper shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, given the witness identifications, that's not what I asked. Steel entered her voice. Did you investigate the bus camera footage mentioned in these statements? The police reports didn't, Your Honor. The prosecutor stood. We have 3 witnesses who identified the defendant, from a vague description that could match thousands of people. Michael couldn't help himself. The cameras would show exactly where Dad was. The judge raised her hand for silence. She studied Jerome for a long moment. Mr. Wilson, why are you accepting this plea? Jerome's voice shook. They'll take my son away. Put him in foster care. I can't. I have to protect him by pleading guilty to a crime you didn't commit. Your Honor, Cooper started. Quiet. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Wilson, your son has done something remarkable here. He's 13 years old, but he's gathered more exculpatory evidence than your own lawyer. She turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Carter, I want that bus camera footage on my desk by tomorrow morning. If it shows what these statements suggest. Your Honor, please. Michael stepped forward. They'll make him sign the deal today. The judge's eyes softened slightly. Young man, I'm rejecting this plea agreement, and I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the handling of evidence in this case. The words took a moment to register. Michael's knees went weak. Dad! His voice came out small, questioning. Jerome was crying openly now. My boy, my brave, stubborn boy. The judge banged her gavel. Hearing adjourned. Mr. Wilson will remain in custody pending review of new evidence. We'll reconvene next week. The courtroom erupted in motion. The prosecutor gathered her papers quickly, face tight with anger. Cooper stood frozen, staring at Michael like he'd never seen him before. But Michael saw only his father as the officers led him back toward the holding cell. I love you, Jerome called over his shoulder. I'm so proud of you, son. Then he was gone, leaving Michael standing alone before the bench, clutching his folder of evidence that had finally made someone listen. The judge cleared her throat softly. Mr. Wilson. Michael turned, wiping his eyes. Your mother would be very proud, too. He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Outside the courtroom, his phone buzzed to life with missed calls and messages. But for the first time in weeks, the weight crushing his chest had lifted slightly. They hadn't won yet, but they had a chance now. And sometimes a chance was all you needed. The week crawled by like broken glass. Michael sat in the empty apartment, jumping at every phone ring, every email notification, every knock at the door. The judge's words played on repeat in his mind. I want that bus camera footage on my desk by tomorrow morning. But tomorrow had come and gone. Then another, and another. His phone buzzed. Cooper's office, hearing rescheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Be there. Michael's hands shook as he read the message. Cooper hadn't spoken to him since the last hearing, but something in his tone had changed. Less dismissive, more urgent. The knock at the door wasn't CPS this time. Mrs. Thompson stood there, bags of groceries in her arms. You didn't think I'd leave you alone through this, did you? She pushed past him into the kitchen. Even if I had to drive back from Jersey every day. Michael watched her unpack food, real food, not the ramen and crackers he'd been living on. You don't have to. Hush. She turned on the stove. You need your strength for tomorrow. And you're too skinny. The smell of cooking filled the apartment, bringing back memories of his mother, of family dinners, of life before everything fell apart. What if they still don't listen? The words slipped out before he could stop them. Mrs. Thompson paused her stirring. That judge listened. She saw what everyone else missed. A son fighting for his father's life. But the prosecutors can't hide the truth forever. She set a plate in front of him. Now eat. Then sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. Morning came too slowly and too quickly at once. Michael's court clothes felt looser. He hadn't noticed how much weight he'd lost these past weeks. The courthouse seemed different now. Less intimidating. Or maybe he was different. Cooper waited outside the courtroom, pacing. His tie was crooked. Michael. He stopped pacing. I should have listened. Did they find the footage? Cooper's face tightened. Judge Pearson's been asking some hard questions. The police claim technical difficulties, missing files. They're lying. Keep your voice down. Cooper glanced around. Look, things might get ugly in there. The prosecutor doesn't like losing. Michael squared his shoulders. Neither do I. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Mrs. Thompson sat directly behind him this time, her presence solid and reassuring. The prosecutor huddled with two police officers, their faces grim. Jerome arrived in chains again, but his eyes were clearer now. Hopeful. All rise. Judge Pearson swept in, her face stormy. She didn't bother with preliminaries. Ms. Carter. Her voice could have frozen fire. Where is my footage? The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, after extensive search, it appears the files were corrupted during transfer. Really? The judge held up a USB drive. Because I had my clerk contact Metropolitan Bus Company directly. Their IT department found it quite easily. The prosecutor's face went white. One of the police officers shifted uncomfortably. Shall we watch it together? Judge Pearson nodded to her clerk. A screen lowered from the ceiling. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Jerome's bus, timestamp 2:13 p.m., pulling up to Washington Elementary. Children filing off. Parents waving. 2:14 p.m. Jerome helping a small girl with crutches down the steps. 2:15 p.m. The exact moment the convenience store was being robbed 3 miles away. Silence fell over the courtroom. Ms. Carter, the judge's voice was deadly quiet. Would you like to explain why this exculpatory evidence was withheld from the defense? The prosecutor stood, smoothing her jacket. Your Honor, in light of new evidence, the state moves to dismiss all charges. Denied. Your Honor. I said denied. Judge Pearson leaned forward. Mr. Wilson has spent weeks in jail, nearly pled guilty to a crime he didn't commit, and almost lost his son to foster care. We're going to address that. She turned to the police officers. Detective Reynolds, Detective Martinez, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into your handling of this case. Badge numbers and supervisor contact information to my clerk. Now. The officers stood frozen. Now. They scrambled to comply. Mr. Wilson, the judge's voice softened. Please stand. Jerome rose slowly, chains rattling. In light of clear evidence of your innocence, all charges are dismissed with prejudice. You are free to go. She banged her gavel. Bailiff, remove those chains. The sound of metal unlocking echoed through the courtroom. Jerome rubbed his wrists, tears streaming down his face. Dad! Michael couldn't wait anymore. He ran forward, throwing himself into his father's arms. Jerome caught him, lifting him off his feet like he used to when Michael was small. They cried together, holding each other as if they'd never let go. My boy, Jerome whispered. My brave, brilliant boy. Mrs. Thompson was crying too. Even Cooper looked away, wiping his eyes. Mr. Wilson, Judge Pearson's voice cut through the emotion. The court offers its sincerest apologies for this miscarriage of justice. You'll be contacted about compensation for wrongful imprisonment. She turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Carter, I'm referring this case to the Bar Association for ethics review. Detective Reynolds, Detective Martinez, expect calls from Internal Affairs. The prosecutor gathered her papers quickly, face burning. The officers slipped out the back door. Michael. The judge waited until he looked up. What you did was extraordinary. Have you considered a future in law? He managed a watery smile. Yes, Your Honor. I have. Good. She stood. Court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered. Questions flew. Mr. Wilson, how does it feel to be free? Michael, what made you fight so hard? Will you be filing a civil suit? But none of that mattered. Michael held his father's hand. Warm, solid, free, as they walked into the sunshine. Mrs. Thompson waited by her car. Let's get you both home. Home. The word felt different now. Stronger. Michael. Jerome stopped walking. I'm sorry, I almost gave up. Almost took that deal. You were trying to protect me, and you protected me right back. Jerome squeezed his hand, just like your mother would have done. They drove home in comfortable silence. The apartment would need cleaning. Bills would need paying. Life would need rebuilding. But they would do it together, and that was all that mattered. The keys scraped in the lock. A familiar sound made new again. Jerome pushed open the apartment door, pausing at the threshold. Michael watched his father take in the aftermath of their weeks apart. Dishes in the sink, papers scattered across tables, his bus uniform jacket draped over a chair. Sorry about the mess, Michael said quietly. I tried to. Jerome pulled him into a tight hug, cutting off his words. They stood there in the doorway, holding each other, until Mrs. Thompson gently cleared her throat behind them. Let's get this place sorted out, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Then we'll order some real food. The next few hours passed in a blur of cleaning and reorganizing. Jerome stopped often to pick up photos, touch familiar objects, relearn the space that had been taken from him. His fingers lingered on the frame, holding Mary's picture, Michael's mother smiling from behind clean glass. I wiped it every day, Michael said. Like Mom used to. Jerome's voice was rough. You took care of everything. Not everything. Michael looked down. I couldn't pay the bills. They're sending notices. Hey. Jerome knelt in front of him. You did more than anyone could have expected. More than I had any right to ask. But, no buts. Jerome squeezed his shoulders. We'll figure it out. Together. The doorbell rang. Pizza delivery. They sat around the kitchen table, the same table where everything had fallen apart that morning weeks ago. But now the evening light was warm, and the apartment smelled of cleaning supplies and fresh food instead of fear and burnt eggs. The bus company called, Jerome said between bites. They want me back. With back pay and an apology. Michael's pizza stopped halfway to his mouth. Really? Really? Jerome smiled. A real smile, reaching his eyes. Thanks to a certain someone's investigation, Mrs. Thompson raised her paper cup of soda. To Michael Wilson, future lawyer extraordinaire. Michael felt his face heat. I just wanted the truth. Sometimes it's all justice needs. Jerome's face grew serious. But son, we need to talk about school. Michael's stomach tightened. He'd almost forgotten about all the missed classes, the unanswered emails, the attendance hearing. I can explain. Already did. Mrs. Thompson cut in. Called them this morning. Told them everything. They're willing to work with you. Let you make up what you missed. Relief flooded through him. Really? On one condition. Jerome raised an eyebrow. You join the debate team. The debate team? Judge's orders. Jerome grinned. She called the school herself. Said that kind of advocacy shouldn't go to waste. Michael thought about the courtroom, about standing up and making people listen. It had been terrifying. But also, right? Okay, he said. I'll do it. Later, after Mrs. Thompson left with promises to visit soon, Michael and Jerome sat on the couch together. The TV played quietly in the background, but neither really watched it. Dad. Michael's voice was small. Are you mad? About what I did? Jerome was quiet for a long moment. I was scared. Scared they'd hurt you, or take you away. Scared you'd destroy yourself, trying to save me. He turned to face his son. But mad? No. I'm proud. So proud it hurts. I couldn't let them win. Michael's voice cracked. Not after Mom. We couldn't save her. But, come here. Jerome pulled him close. Your mother fought till the end. Against the cancer, against the insurance companies, against everything. You get that from her. That never-give-up spirit. They sat in silence, remembering. The hospital rooms, the rejected claims, the final, quiet moments. She'd be proud too, Jerome whispered. So proud of the man you're becoming. Morning came early the next day. Michael woke to the smell of coffee and eggs. Not burnt this time. He found his father in the kitchen, humming as he cooked. First day back at work, Jerome explained, sliding a plate across the table. Gotta get back to normal? But normal felt different now. Stronger. Like they'd been broken and put back together with steel in their spines. Michael ate quickly, then changed into his school uniform. His backpack felt lighter somehow, even with all the makeup work inside. They walked together to the bus terminal, son to school, father to work. The other drivers called out greetings, offering fist bumps and handshakes. Word had spread about what happened, about how a 13-year-old boy had fought the system and won. Hey, Michael. Mr. Jackson waved from his bus. Debate team, huh? You'll knock him dead, kid. At the school entrance, Jerome straightened Michael's tie. You sure you're ready? Michael thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the loneliness, the desperate fight for justice. He was different now. Stronger. Like his father. Like his mother. Yeah, he said, I'm ready. Pick you up at 3? Jerome checked his watch. Got the afternoon route today. Michael smiled. I'll be here. He watched his father walk away, straight-backed and proud in his cleaned and pressed uniform. Then he turned toward the school doors, toward his future. The morning sun caught his mother's old watch on his wrist, the one she'd left him. The face was scratched, but the hands still moved true, ticking away the seconds of his new beginning. He had homework to catch up on, debate team preparations to start, a whole life to rebuild. But that was okay. They'd do it together one day at a time, just like his mother would have wanted, just like they should have been doing all along. Michael pushed open the school doors and stepped into his future, carrying with him the strength of his father's love, the memory of his mother's courage, and the knowledge that justice, real justice, was worth fighting for. No matter how young you are, no matter how long it takes, no matter what. 10:15 p.m. Still no response from the IT department. Michael pulled out his good clothes, the ones he'd worn to his mother's funeral. The shirt was tight now, the pants a little short, but they'd have to do. He laid them out carefully, smoothing the wrinkles. Then he pulled his mother's photo from his wallet, the last one taken before she got sick. Her smile still bright, her eyes full of life. "I couldn't save you," he whispered to the photo. "The treatments were too expensive. The insurance wouldn't cover it. Dad worked double shifts, but it wasn't enough." His vision blurred with tears. "But I can save him. I have to." 11:03 p.m. His phone stayed silent. Michael paced the apartment, reviewing his plan. The courthouse opened at 8 a.m. He'd get there early, try one last time to make Cooper listen. If that failed, a new email notification lit up his phone screen. His heart stopped. From J. Roberts at Metropolitan Bus. Com subject. Bus 247 camera footage. Michael, "I'm sorry about your father, but I can't help. The footage has been turned over to the police as evidence. Accessing it now would be illegal. I hope you understand." Jim Roberts. Michael's hands shook as he read the words again. And again, the police had the footage. They had proof of his father's innocence, and they were burying it. Rage boiled up in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. He wanted to scream, to break things, to make them listen. But that wouldn't save his father. 11:47 p.m. The folder sat ready on his desk. His court clothes hung pressed and waiting. Michael pulled out one last piece of paper. At the top, he wrote, "Why Jerome Wilson is innocent. Evidence and timeline." He worked through the night, transferring every note, every statement, every scrap of proof into clear, organized points. His hand cramped. His eyes burned. But he kept writing. 2:34 a.m. The final draft sat complete. Michael changed into his court clothes, his fingers clumsy with exhaustion as he knotted his tie. In the bathroom mirror, his mother's eyes stared back at him from his own face. "Watch over us," he whispered to her reflection. "Please." He lay down fully dressed, setting 3 alarms on his phone. The courthouse was a 40-minute bus ride away. He needed to be there when the doors opened. In less than 12 hours, his father would face a choice: plead guilty to a crime he didn't commit, or risk losing everything. Unless Michael could stop it. He closed his eyes, still clutching the folder of evidence to his chest. Outside his window, the city hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another.